Joining us now is Republican Congressman Tom Emmer from Minnesota. He is the majority whip and sits on the Financial Services Committee. Whip Emmer, thank you for coming on. You are a big supporter of Ukraine. What do you hope will come out of this call with Zelensky this morning, a day after President Trump talked to Putin?
Well, I mean, the thing, Pamela, thanks for having me. The thing that you left out in that was that literally within the last hour or two, there was a prisoner exchange going on between the Russians and the Ukrainians. This is the first movement towards peace, I would argue, that we've seen since this war broke out. And hopefully what's going to happen here is exactly what President Trump said he was going to do, is get them both to the table and help them reach an agreement that can bring peace back to the region.
And you're absolutely right. We should have mentioned that 175 prisoners, I believe, were exchanged on both sides. So that aside, you know, the readout from both sides was that there would be a ceasefire on attacks on energy infrastructure. But both sides, Ukraine and Russia, are saying that there were attacks, regardless of the call. Putin has continued to make maximalist demands to control parts of Ukraine. President Trump says land concessions are on the table. Zelensky says Ukraine will not recognize the occupied territories as Russian, calling it a red line. So where do negotiations go from here?
Well, I think you've got a master negotiator as a world leader who's actually trying to facilitate this mediated discussion. Where that leads, Pamela, we'll have to see. You at least have two willing participants to have the discussion, but do not expect them to start out by saying, I'm giving up this, I'm getting that, or it's not going to work. They're going to represent their people. We should expect that, and we should honor that. I'm no fan of Putin, but I think at the end of the day, getting him to the table and having this discussion, again, it's the first step towards peace that we have seen in this conflict since it started. And I'm very hopeful that there's a path that they're going to be able to get it done so the Ukrainian people can get back to living as opposed to fighting.
You call President Trump a master negotiator. I know other Republicans have been saying that. Critics have argued that Putin is playing Trump, that we know from history this is right out of his playbook, that sometimes he uses negotiations as a stall tactic, and that so far he hasn't really given up anything. And he said after the discussion with Trump that he will agree to the ceasefire if the U.S. stops all foreign military aid and intelligence to Ukraine. Would you ever support that?
Again, I do say Donald Trump is a master negotiator. I mean, there is no other leader on the world stage that has his experience and has shown what he has shown in his first term, what he's willing to do and what he can get accomplished. If anybody can help these people get together and bring peace back to the region, it's Donald J. Trump.
And you know, you talk about Russia, bringing Russia to the table, but as you well know, Russia wants the legitimacy. Russia wants to be recognized by the United States. Russia wants to normalize relations with the United States. And there are arguments from those who have studied Russia that the U.S., in order to really get Putin to come to the table in a substantive way, that the U.S. needs to be tougher on Putin. Would you like to see the U.S. be tougher on Russia, or even use frozen Russian assets, for example? Would that be a good idea?
Well, I'm going to tell you, I think the time for that toughness that you're talking about was when Joe Biden was coming into office. The problem is Joe Biden and his administration allowed this to happen. And I agree with our president. This conflict never would have broken out had he been the one in the White House. And now he's inherited what was created under the Biden administration, and he's trying to get these two very different parties, they don't like each other, to the table to have a discussion to see if there's a path for peace in the region, which I don't think is of primary interest to Americans. It's of primary interest to Americans and everyone around the globe. We would love to see these conflicts resolved and get back to the business of building relationships and doing business.
Yeah, and I know a lot of Republicans have said that they believe this would have never happened under Trump's watch. Of course, there is no way to definitively prove that, and we will see what happens with these negotiations. I want to pivot to Supreme Court Chief Justice Roberts' rebuke after President Trump said a federal judge should be impeached over a decision he disagreed with. Listen to what retired Justice Stephen Breyer just told my colleague Wolf Blitzer about this.
I mean, when you have a district court judge or you have a court of appeals judge, somebody's going to win and somebody's going to lose. What do you think the losing side thinks of the judge or the judge's decision? Naturally, they think it's wrong. Of course, that happens every day of the week, across the entire country, and judges are wrong sometimes. So what does that person do? He appeals. He asks for a special writ in some cases, but he gets others to review the decision.
Do you agree with the rhetoric coming from the president about judges, in particular this latest judge, Boasberg, calling him a radical left lunatic, calling for his impeachment, calling him a troublemaker and agitator? Can you hear me? Whip Emmer?
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought it was going on. I was listening to
okay.
Justice Breyer.
That's okay.
I'm going to tell you. I think when it comes to the impeachment issue, you already know you need 67 senators, and after Chuck Schumer's humiliation last week, I don't think he's going to go down that road anytime soon. When it comes to this issue, the big issue is that 77 million people voted for Donald Trump, and they voted for him to get these criminals out of our country, to make sure that we're safe and secure in our communities. He's trying to honor that. And as far as working with the legal system, I think Justice Breyer said it best. When you have a disagreement, you'll resolve it through the courts.
Right, and there's no doubt that, President Trump was put into office by millions. That's not the question, and whether he's trying to carry out his policies. The question is about the separation of powers and whether the President of the United States should be calling for the impeachment of a judge, which, as I know, there in the Constitution specific requirements: treason, bribery, high crimes, and misdemeanors. But just overall, big picture, I know that you're a big supporter of President Trump, of course, but he has tested the boundaries of presidential power and now seeming to want to do away with checks and balances. He says he will follow the judge's orders, but he clearly has taken steps, not just attacking judges, but he has gotten rid of inspectors general without notifying Congress under the law, freezing funds appropriated by Congress, trying to get rid of birthright citizenship in the Constitution, firing these federal trade commissioners when there's a Supreme Court precedent saying a president can't do it. What do you think about all of that, taken as a whole?
Well, again, I think this is a narrative that the media is trying to create.
No, just
in
to
fact,
be respectful with Emmer, it's not
Pamela,
a narrative. I just
I'm going to be respectful
out specific
too.
Examples.
But when you don't talk about the Dobbs decision that Joe Biden viciously attacked our Supreme Court because he disagreed with it, and you make this look like something it's not, Donald Trump's not happy, I'm sure. But when it comes to what he's trying to do, there are 77 million Americans who elected him to do exactly what he's doing. And you know what? There's a lot of Americans who are very frustrated with judges who appear to be legislating from the bench instead of applying the law to the facts that are presented.
Right. First of all, Biden did not call for the judge to be impeached. But as you well know, there is a separation of powers. There's Article 3.
So he didn't use the word impeachment.
Which, okay, but, and listen, that's in the past. This isn't about whataboutism. And I didn't just focus on the judge. I also focused on everything as a whole. But also, look, this is the way that our democracy works, whether you like it or not. And there is a judicial process under Article 3 that goes up to the Supreme Court. That is what is happening here. This law was challenged. It went to a judge. The judge made the ruling. There's appeals, and it goes up through the process. Do you have a problem with the way that our system of government under the Constitution is made up?
Not at all. If that's what you're asking me, Pamela, I would actually interpret some of the things you just said differently, but you and I have a different perspective on this. I think that the administration is doing exactly what they were elected to do. I think the judicial branch is going to do what it has been doing, and guess what? You'll resolve it in court in the long run. That's why Justice Breyer, it was a very balanced statement when he talks about that's what you do. You'll appeal it, you'll take it from there.
Yeah, I don't think we have different perspectives then, because we're just laying out the facts under the Constitution and how our system of democracy works. I want to go to something else happening on Capitol Hill. After passing the government funding bill, Republicans are pivoting to reconciliation in order to make President Trump's tax cuts permanent. As you know, that the Congressional Budget Office says cuts to Medicaid would need to be included to meet the goals outlined in the GOP budget. Millions of Americans rely on Medicaid. What do you say to Americans that are concerned right now that they could lose their health care?
Well, the statement that it requires huge cuts to Medicaid benefits is simply not true. I mean, the GAO, Pamela, says that there's $50 billion a year annually in fraud, waste, and abuse in Medicaid. You can get $500 billion over the 10-year window just by cleaning up the waste, fraud, and abuse. So first, I disagree with the way that's teed up. And second, when you talk about tax cuts, I think that's a misnomer. Taxes are where they are and where they've been since 2017. We're talking about, do we allow the American public to experience the greatest tax increase ever, $4.5 trillion to $5 trillion, or do we continue with the tax policy that we have right now? We agree with the president who told Americans that we would make it permanent.
Okay. And just to follow up, you said you disagree with the way it's teed up. I'm just telling you what Americans are concerned about. We're hearing that in town halls as well across the country. And it is a fact that that is what the CBO said, that there would have to be substantial cuts to Medicaid to reach that $880 billion in cuts that Republicans would need. President Trump, we should emphasize, says Medicare will not be touched. But he has endorsed, as you're also seeming to endorse, the so-called waste, fraud, and abuse. What do you say to critics who claim that's just cover to make substantial cuts to Medicare? And you're saying that because you know how bad it would be politically to say we're going to make cuts to Medicare.
Donald Trump's already said that we're not, and that there's no way.
But you're going to make cuts based on waste, fraud, and abuse, right?
Pamela, you're doing it again. You're trying to put words out there that don't exist. What this is literally fine. And by the way, waste, fraud, and abuse. You're not in favor of getting rid of waste, fraud, and abuse, and you rely on the CBO. You rely on the CBO that has absolutely been unreliable in the last 7-8 years or more. So while they're necessary, we got to work with them. You can't. You can say it's nonpartisan, but what did they say about the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act when it was enacted into law in 2017? They said it wasn't going to generate any revenue like it has. It's been exponential compared to what they predicted.
Sure,
they're like weather people. They don't have to be right, and they put these out.
You can criticize them. But what I'm getting at, are Republicans going to make cuts through waste, fraud, and abuse to Medicaid, as you said? I'm not putting words in your mouth. I'm just asking a question.
I think cleaning up programs, getting rid of the waste, the fraud, the abuse, so that these programs can actually be funded for the people who they were created for. I think that is a Republican, Democrat, and American goal. And I think the president's doing it right, and we're going to.
What specifically does that look like when it comes to cutting waste, fraud, and abuse with Medicaid? How do you do that? What are you looking at? What are the metrics?
Yeah, we'll get into the details as we go forward. I'm going based on the GAO that says there's $50 billion a year that they can point to. So let's figure out where that $50 billion is and let's clean it up.
Whip Emmer, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Pamela.